Hey everybody, it's Shaman Sister Sin, and you're listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by Transrelational Healing, ShamanSpiritCenter.com, and LittleShaman.org. That's me, Little Shaman. Before we get started, I would like to mention that the Narcissistic Abuse Recovery Clinic is being held June 29th and 30th, 2 days, 5 hours each. We will be covering things like understanding and addressing trauma bonds, creating boundaries, regaining your sense of agency after abuse, and much, much more. If you are interested in attending the clinic, you can sign up for that on littleshaman.org. Hope to see you there. Today I wanted to talk to you about something that applies to many, many narcissists, and that is a phenomenon called main character syndrome. This is not to be confused with main character energy, which describes the much more positive situation of someone taking back control of their own life. As you might expect, main character syndrome is a descriptive term that refers to someone walking through life behaving as if and believing that they are the main character, not just in their own lives, but in every situation that they're involved in. This means they see themselves as the most important person in any scenario, as the main focus, the only one who truly matters. The main character in a movie or a book is the central focus of the story. They are the person that viewers or readers care about and root for. They are the one whose actions truly matter. The one whose every move we are watching to see what are they going to do, how are they going to react, how do things affect them, how is this all going to turn out, and much more. They are the one who must triumph, the one person who cannot die in the story, because without them there is no story. We've all seen examples of main character syndrome in real life. Social media is full of that. While it isn't always the case, part of main character syndrome can be the conscious and intentional creation of a false persona that is presented to the world instead of the actual self. There can be a very conscious and intentionally performative aspect to this phenomenon. A very purposeful intent to deceive other people into believing the person is something different or bigger or better than what they actually are. Again, social media is replete with this kind of thing and is actually likely a largely contributing factor to the I'm the star of my own little movie sort of mindset that we see in so many of these situations. Now, most of us see ourselves as the sort of main character in our own lives. That's just how being human works. We are usually the central focus of our own lives to a normal and healthy degree. When someone is a balanced personality with an appropriately sized, healthy, functioning ego, that's not usually a problem. However, as signified by the word syndrome, the people who could be said to embody main character syndrome are people who experience this perception to an excessive, unhealthy, and or detrimental problematic degree. In fact, many of the problems stem from the fact that this kind of person is not only the sole central focus of their own lives, they expect to be the central focus of everybody else's life too. And when they're not, they become upset or angry. This is where it's unhealthy and problematic. This type of person may feel unfairly mistreated or callously overlooked. They might not even be able to believe that everything that's happening is not about them somehow. Their agenda is the only agenda. The way circumstances or events impact them is all that matters, no matter what. These are the people who say things like, my neighbor's house burning down was one of the worst nights of my life. We were dragged out of bed, the firefighters were so rude, or my friend coming down with a serious illness has been so awful for me. She never calls me or comes over anymore. This kind of person sees everything in terms of how it affects them, no matter how strongly it's affecting other people. They might walk around as if they are constantly on stage, or as if a camera crew is following them around, documenting their every move, as if they are in a hall of mirrors, with each one reflecting only them. As anyone who understands pathologically narcissistic people knows, that hall of mirrors analogy is actually more truth than metaphor. Every other person a narcissist interacts with is used only as a mirror for the narcissist to see themselves. In this sense, literally everything that happens or that other people do actually is about them somehow. When something happens to that person which does not impact the narcissist, it doesn't register with them because there is no reflection of them in that information or that situation. Therefore, there's nothing to see. This is the way that main characters are presented in movies and books. They are limited dimensionally in the sense that there are no events described that don't impact the main character or characters in some way. Why would there be? It doesn't have anything to do with the story. There's no place in the book for how the main character's best friend got a divorce unless it affects the main character in some way. The supporting characters in books and movies are even more limited dimensionally. Their only function is to flesh out the main personality or to create some kind of contrast for that character. And that's how they're treated, as extensions of the main character or as connected to them in a very fundamental way. They don't have their own lives or problems or feelings or anything else unless this affects the main character somehow. However, in real life, that's not how things work. In real life, you are usually expected to care about the things that impact people close to you, even if they don't impact you. And most of us do, by the way. Most of us do care about these things. For people who fit the description of main character syndrome, this is very often where they run into trouble. Because others are seen as a sort of supporting cast, there's often not a lot of empathy for or even acknowledgement of their problems, their feelings, their perspectives, or even they themselves at all. This causes strained relationships because most people find this level of self-centeredness unpleasant to deal with. People generally don't like being treated as if they don't matter. The person suffering from main character syndrome may be unable to understand what the problem is. When someone struggles with empathy and identification with others in this way, they often have a genuinely hard time understanding why other people matter, why other people deserve consideration, or how they themselves are being inconsiderate or invalidating. They genuinely do not see it. And why would they? You can't see what you can't see. Some of the other characteristics of main character syndrome besides lack of empathy include an inflated sense of self-importance, distorted perception of reality, specifically regarding themselves and their place in the world, entitlement, difficulty accepting criticism or failure. To be clear, main character syndrome can be present in people who are not pathologically narcissistic. Main character syndrome could perhaps even be defined as an expression of narcissistic traits or tendencies when it appears in people who are not pathologically narcissistic. We generally assess the severity of narcissism on a spectrum, which means that there are many people who have narcissistic traits, even pretty strong ones, but do not qualify as pathologically narcissistic. The personality is still impacted by maladaptive or disproportionate unhealthy narcissism, but not to the degree that we see in a pathological personality. This means that a person can have a version of these behaviors or perceptions without the underlying complication and dysfunction of a personality disorder, which really is an extremely serious mental health issue that affects a person on every level in every area. Personality disorders are very serious. People with narcissistic traits may still have some empathy, for example. They often have a more stable identity. They are generally not delusional. They're less psychologically rigid. They might be capable of some true self-reflection. They usually have the capacity for at least some adaptive functioning in some areas of life. In other words, they might be selfish, self-centered, arrogant, stubborn, mean, and many other things, but they don't have a pathological personality. As an aside, people often find the idea of a narcissistic spectrum confusing in the sense that they can feel that it makes it harder to identify narcissists. The reality is we don't really need to identify narcissists down to the nano degree. Just because you can't tell whether someone has an incurable personality disorder or not doesn't mean you can't evaluate the relationship for safety and viability. These things are not even related to each other. You don't need to know someone's degree of pathology to recognize them as an abuser or a cheater or somebody who doesn't recognize the needs and rights of other people. People generally stick on this point because a lot of times they're looking for some reason to hope that this person can change or that the relationship can be salvaged. But the reality is that if another adult is mistreating people, they either can't understand that abuse is wrong and by now they never will, or they just don't care. Either way, the relationship is not worth holding on to, and someone does not need to be diagnosed with an incurable disorder or check off a bunch of boxes before you can decide that it's in your best interest to end the relationship. It doesn't matter what someone's diagnosis is or would be in this context. It is not being recognized or diagnosed as a narcissist that makes a healthy relationship with someone like this impossible. What makes a healthy relationship with them impossible is them not caring about other people. That is the problem here. And it's really all that matters when we're evaluating the relationship. In this context, the pathology is incidental, meaning that when it comes to evaluating the relationship for safety and viability, why the mistreatment is happening doesn't really matter. It just really doesn't. The fact that the mistreatment is happening at all is much more important. And to be clear, someone with strong narcissistic traits can be just as unhealthy in a relationship context as someone who is pathologically narcissistic. They generally won't be as fundamentally dysfunctional, limited, or rigid as someone who is pathologically narcissistic. But how much is that really saying when we're talking about dysfunction and deficit of this magnitude? There are 9 criteria for diagnosis of NPD, and at least 5 are required to be met for diagnosis. If someone only exhibits 4, for example, or say they exhibit 5 or 7 or even all 9, but to a lesser degree, they're not going to be any easier to have a healthy relationship with. That's really the overall takeaway here. However, when someone is pathologically narcissistic, when they are further down on the narcissistic spectrum in severity, we end up with main character syndrome on steroids. Why? Because the characteristics of main character syndrome are inherent to a personality this impacted by unhealthy narcissism. A simple way to say it would be that while not all people who exhibit main character syndrome are pathologically narcissistic, all pathologically narcissistic people exhibit main character syndrome. The characteristics of the syndrome are core features of the pathologically narcissistic personality. The lack of empathy, the inflated view of one's own importance or place in the world, entitlement, difficulty accepting criticism or failure, and all the other things are part and parcel to a severely narcissistic personality. These personalities are always performing, always on stage, and they definitely regard others as the supporting cast in the major motion picture of their life. They are the star, the main player, the focus of the story and the attention. The rest of the people are there to support this and flesh it out, to provide contrast or opposition or a helping hand or an obstacle. The fact that they are their own people with their own stories and their own feelings and their own thoughts and their own lives not only doesn't matter, it isn't even really understood. The fact that you lost your job and your children might be going hungry doesn't matter to your narcissistic brother-in-law. What matters is that he cannot borrow money off of you anymore. It isn't even that it doesn't matter, actually, because that would imply that it is being acknowledged as a reality. The truth is, how things affect anyone besides themselves does not even occur to the majority of these people, and that does not apply only to their own actions. We often hear that narcissists do not understand or care how their own actions affect other people. No. It's not just their own actions. Narcissists don't understand or care how anything affects other people. That's what a lack of empathy is. And if you pay attention to their behavior, you can actually see that very clearly. Oh, there's no reflection of me in this mirror? Nothing to look at then. Moving on. In a very literal sense, if the thing is not about the narcissist somehow, it doesn't register as something they need to care about or pay any attention to at all in any way. Why would it? If it doesn't affect the main character, how is it important? Why would it register? Why would they even notice it until it's pointed out? And once it is pointed out, why would they think it matters? As we have talked about many times on this show over the years, it's hard for healthy people with empathy to understand this way of functioning. Many people, understandably, assume that, like they themselves do, narcissists must register these things on some level, but they have callously and cruelly decided that they just don't care. That might be true for some narcissists, but many of them seem legitimately surprised, even shocked, when faced with the reality of impact on other people. It's as if they've never even considered that other people have feelings or can be affected by things too. And on this show, we maintain that evidence and observation suggests that they haven't. They haven't considered that other people have feelings and can be affected by things. And they don't have any real understanding of why they should. Why should they consider it? For lack of a better way to say it, the piece that makes people care about things like that is missing in narcissists. In other words, this is not a performative stance or even a choice. Their behavior is, but their lack of understanding is not. People with no empathy genuinely do not register the emotional experiences of others. They just don't. That's what a lack of empathy does. That's what it is. What a lack of empathy does not do is cause somebody to be cruel or abusive. Lack of empathy does not cause people to intentionally hurt others. It makes being intentionally hurtful easier, but to behave that way is still a choice. This is why narcissists are and will remain responsible for their actions. It's a choice to hurt other people on purpose, and many, many, many narcissists do that. Lack of empathy does not make them do that, it just makes doing it easier. Narcissists know the difference between right and wrong. Because they lack empathy, it is not possible for them to truly understand the impact of their behavior or anything else on other people. Therefore, hurting others does not impact them in any real way. It actually doesn't need to, though, because they know it's wrong to do the things that they're doing, and that's all that's required for them to be held responsible. For example, in court. The law does not require that you care if what you did was wrong. It only requires that you know it was wrong, and narcissists do. They are consistently found competent and criminally culpable in court for that reason. The psychological and emotional challenges that narcissists face, despite being very serious and deep-seated, do not mitigate their ability to tell right from wrong or to control their behavior. These things just make it so that they don't care whether something they do is considered wrong or not, because they're the only thing that matters. That's not an excuse or a justification for anything. Anyone who disagrees with that can break all of this down to its real-life application and see what they think. That works out to be, I'm not capable of caring about other people, and I don't recognize or even see the rights of other people since I'm more important, so I hurt people whenever it works for me. That is the unfortunate reality of these personalities, point blank. The concept of main character syndrome fits in perfectly with the way narcissistic personalities see other people, as objects to either enhance or impede their own agendas, goals, or image. This is the way the main character operates when they are a narcissist. All cameras are filming them, all eyes are on them, all ears are tuned into them. The people around them are simply mirrors that reflect this back to the narcissist. As a quick refresher, pathologically narcissistic people have enormous difficulty forming a stable self-image, self-concept, or identity. They rely on the input of other people to do this for them via that person's expressed impressions of the narcissist and their reactions to the narcissist, the same way very small children rely on this information from caregivers. That's what so-called narcissistic supply is for. It is, for lack of a better way to say it, converted into self-image, self-esteem, and approximation of identity and all of the other things that this person cannot create or sustain on their own. This is an automatic process that happens because this is the way this personality functions in accordance with its deficits and limitations. Narcissists cannot form a coherent, cohesive identity independent of external input and validation. This isn't something they're doing intentionally per se, it's how they function, which means it isn't something they can just stop doing. This means that no matter what happens, this person is going to continue trying to secure narcissistic supply in whatever ways that have worked for them, because this is the only way this personality has of regulating itself. Seeing others as objects is an intrinsic part of this process. In fact, it would not be overstating it to say that without the objectification of others, the entire framework of the narcissistic personality structure could not function at all. This is a prerequisite for the maladaptive process by which a narcissistic personality regulates itself. The recognition of other people as sovereign, subjective, autonomous, and individual human beings would fundamentally demolish the entire process of reflection that narcissists depend on. It would make it categorically impossible. In other words, objectification of others is not a byproduct of this process. It's an essential component of it. The process cannot happen without it. As we've discussed in other episodes of the show, this is particularly harmful to the children of this kind of person. The inability of narcissistic parents to see their children as anything other than supportive characters in their own main production, as anything other than objects to regulate themselves with, in other words, is extremely damaging. It's one of the reasons that so many people with narcissistic parents become narcissists themselves. There's no other outcome that exemplifies the damage and destruction of this dynamic more than that one. But even when people don't become narcissists themselves, because many of them don't, of course, the damage and impact of this dynamic is very severe. It creates adults who have immense difficulty advocating for themselves, knowing who they are, creating boundaries, believing in themselves, trusting other people, and much, much more. It's damaging on nearly every level, as our relationships with important caregivers are what shape our relationships not just with the world, but with ourselves. And if our relationship with ourselves is unhealthy, all of our other relationships are going to be too. If children are taught by these most important people not to trust themselves, if they're taught not to advocate for themselves, if they're taught that they don't matter, if they're taught not to listen to themselves, if they're taught that they're not good enough, the level of damage this is capable of doing to a developing psyche is incalculable. This is damage that typically requires a tremendous amount of work to address in adults. And in some situations, it cannot be addressed at all. Again, there's no more powerful example of the egregious level of harm here than the result of creating more narcissists. If you're dealing with a pathologically narcissistic personality, it's extremely important to understand that this is how it is. Even during the love bombing phase of the relationship, you are not the main character in their life or your own. In point of fact, you do not have your own life. Just as supporting characters in movies and books do not. You don't have your own story. You are the love interest, or the brother, or the daughter, or the whatever of the narcissist. They are the main character. The story is theirs. You are just in it. You are two-dimensional. They are 3D. You are black and white. They are technicolor. You are assigned a role. You play it whether you want to play it or not, and you cannot overcome or escape that role. This is dealing with a narcissist. You are a supporting character in your own life. This reality is inescapable when dealing with people who exhibit narcissistic pathology because of the way the dysfunction works. Every mirror reflects them. Every camera follows them. They are always on stage. Everything that happens is only noteworthy if and because it affects them. This includes anything and everything that has to do with anything or anybody else around them. The narcissist is a spotlight hog, one so fundamentally oblivious to others that they don't even realize that the other people are even there. They will continue to overshadow everybody and everything else around them as long as they're there, taking up all the space, sucking all the air out of every room that they're in. In order to be the main character in your own life, you got to stop sharing the stage with narcissists. I hope this clears a few things up for you. As always, I look forward to your comments, questions, and suggestions, so please keep those coming. I take appointments online, over the phone, via text, via messenger, via email, through Skype and Zoom worldwide. So if you're interested in speaking with me one-on-one, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. I teach workshops, clinics, seminars, classes, and courses. So if you are interested in seeing what we're running, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that. I have several books out for publication, so if you are interested in picking up your copy today, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that or find them on Amazon. And if you're interested in joining our support group with access to exclusive content, weekly support meetings, and more, you can visit littleshaman.org to do that as well. You've been listening to the Meditations and More podcast brought to you by Transrelational Healing, ShamanSpiritCenter.com, and littleshaman.org. That's me, the Little Shaman. May the Great Spirit bless you. Have a beautiful day.
If you've been struggling through dealing with or recovering from an unhealthy relationship with a narcissist or other toxic personality, the Little Shaman has a catalog of over 500 YouTube videos designed to support your journey from discovery to recovery. You can also find additional resources on the Little Shaman website, including tools, courses, workshops, a support group with weekly meetings, and one-on-one appointments with the Little Shaman that are open to clients worldwide. There's even an AI chatbot built and trained exclusively by the Little Shaman using her work that can answer questions 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. For more information, visit littleshaman.org. You can listen to The Little Shaman wherever you find your favorite podcasts.